So we'll be going live today with Michelle Miller, aka the Farm Babe. Oh, there she is. Let's see.
Hey,
Hey, how are
what's going
you?
on? We did it. I'm so
Yeah,
excited
I
to
know.
finally connect
Awesome.
with you again, Erin. This is fantastic.
Yeah, thanks for making time for this.
Yeah, thanks for
Um,
the invite and for putting together the awesome infographic and all that stuff too. This is great. I'm
yeah.
glad to get this to work. I've been doing a lot of the Zoom stuff now
Oh
with
yeah.
home, and
Yeah, I just did
we're
a live with Abby Langer the other week, and there were just a lot of questions that came up that had to do with farming. So I was like, oh, that'd be perfect to have you on so you could. And I obviously get questions about that all the time.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, I was like, well, I should have her on.
Yeah, no, this is great. And I think that's what's so important is to get like the scientists talking to the farmers, to the veterinarians,
Right.
to the dietitians, to the companies, to everything. So we all are on
Yeah.
the same page with sharing factual information. So
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So for those of you that don't know, you've been doing this for way longer than I have. Kind of setting straight some of the myths and just the misinformation that's out there around farming and just food in general. So I guess if you could just get started by telling everybody like how you became the farm babe.
sure. Yeah, so I live on a farm here in Northeast Iowa that grows row crops like corn, soybeans, oats, hay, rye, alfalfa, and then we also raise livestock, beef, cattle, and sheep. And so I started Farm Babe about 5.5 years ago, and it was really just a way to bridge the gap between consumers and farmers, help people learn where their food comes from. And so I kind of grew up in agriculture as a 4-H kid in Wisconsin, but I went to college in Los Angeles. And so when you're kind of exposed to a lot of the big city myths, like you think about anti-GMO or factory farming or all these things that people have concerns with, like I think you and I once did at one point too,
Yep.
you actually end up in the position of a farmer. You realize, wow, like people are really far removed. And I realized that a lot of things I thought I knew were true actually weren't. So it's really just kind of been this discovery to bridge the gap and talk to real farmers. So I travel and do public speaking and go to farms and learn direct from those experts, from those veterinarians, animal welfare experts, farmers, scientists, agronomists, all these people, and then use social media as a platform to tell their stories, to make science easy to understand in more of a fun, digestible, pun intended sort of way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. I
So,
kind
how
of, I
about you?
mean,
Do you want to tell a little bit, I guess, for maybe some of my fans that maybe aren't familiar with you too? Do you want to talk
yeah.
about your background as well?
Yeah, so I went to school for chemical engineering, ended up getting into the food industry when I graduated, and I was working for a large conventional ingredient company. Oddly enough, at the time, I sort of believed in all those myths about organic and non-GMO, and after being there for a few years, I actually wanted to work for a more natural and organic type company. So I worked for a smaller they made ready to eat popcorn products and just started realizing like how all of these labels were just really marketing and didn't really have to do with the nutrition of the food and everything, and just being in the food industry and seeing some of the misinformation out there about like food scientists trying to trying to make food addictive, or I don't know, just like stuff like that when you're actually doing it every day and it's like that's not what we do at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, I happened upon your page before I started mine, and it kind of gave me the inspiration to start my page. I was like, man, there needs to be more people out there telling the factual information, because there's so many accounts out there, and there are people that have never worked in the food industry, like just sort of making up things that they believe, and a lot of it's based on just fears that they have, and
Mhm.
so they kind of make up their own story and then people just believe it.
Uh,
So yeah, I was like, well, I better start a page, and if people want to listen to me, they can listen to me. And yeah.
Yeah, and it's so great to give science a bigger voice. The people that are on the front lines of making our food safe and healthy and affordable are really busy, and they're a very small percentage of the population. So it's a lot easier to scare people. I want to ask you about the quote that you shared. I think it was yesterday. You said, can we stop blaming what we don't?
Yeah, can we stop blaming everything we don't understand? Or what did it say? Everything we don't like to be the cause of everything we don't understand.
Yes, that's what it was. Stop blaming everything we don't like for the causes of everything we don't understand.
Yeah.
That's what it is, right? It's easy to use fear-based marketing to sell somebody something. You know,
right.
Like you can just say, well, actually, good example. There was a food company commercial I saw the other day, actually. Or was it? No, it was a 7th generation laundry detergent commercial. And he goes, your laundry detergent may contain, and then he listed off this big long ingredient, and he goes, yeah, I don't know either. And so it's literally like, you don't even know what it is, and you're demonizing it because you don't know what it is.
Right.
And what's funny about all this is I actually have a legitimate skin condition. Like I have contact dermatitis, atopic, seborrheic dermatitis. Like I have actual skin conditions that I have to be really careful about what I put on my skin. So if anybody's an advocate for like clean products, like it's me. But at the time, just because I'm 1% of the population, I don't expect an entire industry to change and make their products 10 times more expensive to appease me because I'm a special snowflake. Like I just realized that these ingredients are there for a reason, or they're safe or effective, or they keep your products more affordable, whether that's food or cosmetics or whatever. Just like somebody having celiac disease. Is wheat fine for a majority of the population? Sure. Can it affect a small percentage? Sure. But let's stick to the science and the facts and not say, oh my God, like gluten is ruining everybody's lives. You know what I mean?
Right. Like, yeah. And I think that's what people sort of like when you post things about what the actual evidence says, and then people come back and say, well, I don't eat that because I don't feel good when I eat it. And like, that's fine. Don't eat it. Like, I think it gets confused a lot of times with like me advocating for these things when I'm not telling people what to eat. You know what and I think like when I share, you know, just like the other day, even today, I shared something about food colors and, you know, how they're blamed for a lot of things and evidence just isn't there. And that's not me telling you to go out and eat food colors. Like if you don't want to, if you think that, you know, they do cause negative reactions or something like that, like that's fine. But you can't just make those claims, you know, based off of your personal anecdotes. And like you said, I mean, if you have a legitimate, you know, allergy to something, obviously avoid it, but that doesn't mean that everybody should avoid it. So I think it gets confused a lot with, you know, oh, like you're sort of saying like, you know, I have these reactions and you're saying they're not legitimate concerns. And it's like, well, yeah, that could be a legitimate concern for you, but like you still have to base everything off of the evidence. So I don't know. I think people just kind of get confused with that, and they think like, oh, you're just advocating for food, like crappy food and junk food, and it's like, no, that's not the point.
Well, I'm wearing this shirt today. I was trying to decide. I was like, what did I wear on my call with Erin? And I thought
that's awesome.
But it's funny because like we grow GMOs on our farm, you know, like we've got corn and soybeans. We're here in Iowa, and like people say, oh, I stopped eating GMOs and I feel so much better. And it's like, okay, well, let's think about what GMOs are. They're mostly in processed foods. They're mostly corn, soybeans, cotton, canola, sugar beets. So if you're cutting out sugar, carbs, you know, all these, well, guess what? You're probably going to feel better because you just cut like 2,000 calories out of your diet.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Like, congratulations, you turned in your like deep fried whatever for a salad. Like, of course you're going to.
Yeah.
You're not, I mean, junk food in moderation, but I actually eat really healthy. I'm like a huge like veggie eater, you know, like I have a diet based very much on fruits, vegetables, and then a lot of meat and just a little bit of sweets here and there. Like I'll treat myself like one Hershey Kiss after I have like, you know, some grilled veggies and chicken or whatever. Yeah. But yeah, people think, oh, well, you know, you're advocating for this junk food diet. And it's like, no, not at all. Like, does the system need to improve in some places? Absolutely. Should we be eating vegetables? Absolutely. But it doesn't matter if those vegetables say organic or non-GMO. Like It's
Right.
for you regardless of what bullshit the food companies put out
Yeah.
there.
And I think that's the biggest, I mean, one of the biggest, myths that can actually have harmful consequences is telling consumers that they have to buy organic, or, scaring consumers around conventional foods, because then, you know, we need to be eating as many fruits and vegetables as we can. And if we're afraid of the ones that we can afford, and it's like, oh, I can't afford the organic ones, I mean, obviously that can be detrimental to people's health. So yeah, I think that's a huge one. And yeah, I think you've done a great job at, just calling out like Dirty Dozen, and just, yeah, I mean, I guess if you could
So
also
do.
explain to people, if you could explain to people too, just like, I don't know, I think people have this notion that farmers are just spraying, pesticides like all the time. And, you always hear these narratives of the soil just being covered in chemicals and depleted of nutrients. But yeah, like if you could just kind of talk about how pesticides are actually used,
Yeah.
and what rates they're used at.
I would love to. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about. Absolutely. Yeah. So that's one of the biggest misconceptions about that. Okay. So, like, if we as farmers never had to spray pesticides again, we would be so happy. Like, nobody wants to go out there and be like, yeah, I can't wait to spray today. But, if you've ever had a garden, even like a large scale garden, it's a lot of work. Like, by going out there and monitoring your insects that eat everything, your rabbits that eat everything, your weeds that consume everything, that take all your nutrients, that wipe out your yields. I mean, there are so many pests. We have something like 10,000 different species of insects, and or 10,000 species of weeds and 30,000 species of insects, or something like that. Anyway, it's a lot. Don't quote me on those exact, but it's something insane. So, to feed the world, farmers are 1% of the population. And for us, for example, we've got over 2,000 acres. And so within that, you can't weed 2,000 acres by hand. Like, you just can't. But if you're not monitoring that pest pressure, you're going to lose your whole crop and people are going to starve. So chemical means in agriculture, pesticides have been used for thousands of years. It just so happens that over years, we've come up with newer and better and more innovative ways, and we're utilizing chemistry in a more intelligent way, and we're trying to use as little as possible. So when we do spray, like for us, we spray, we grow GMOs. So because of GMOs, we don't have to use insecticides or anything like that anymore. But the herbicide rate is like 22 ounces per acre. So if you're thinking of that, it's like less than 2 of these on an area of land that's an acre. It's about the size of a football field. So it's super duper minimal. And so for other people, maybe, for example, like the apple orchards in Michigan that I toured, this is just one example. They have a lot of issues with blight, a disease there, because they're by Lake Michigan. They get a lot of moisture, so it's a lot of blight. They get a lot of issues. And so they have to spray for this disease, because if your trees end up with disease, they die and we have nothing to eat. So really, the reason why pesticides are called crop protection products is because we have to protect our crops. So an analogy I like to use is like plants are living just like humans. So for humans, we need medicine, we need bug spray, we need sunscreen, we need food, medicine, all this stuff. Well, plants need that too. So it's up to us as farmers to make sure that our plants are growing up strong and healthy, so that people can grow up strong and healthy, because we got to make sure everybody's fed. But the dose always makes the poison. So for us, 22 ounces. For the apple orchards, it was maybe 1 ounce or 5 ounces. So, I mean, you're looking, if this is 16 ounces, I mean, it's nothing. And so people are freaking out saying, oh my God, like your crops are just drenched in chemicals. And it's like, no, wash your produce like we're always supposed to. But I don't fear it at all anymore. I mean, you used to, because people fear what they don't understand. But then once you go, wow, like, I'm more worried about the people that like got their boogers on the produce or like got it or something.
Right.
But no, pesticides are a really important part of crop health. And when you're using it as directed, like farmers take licenses, they have to have certifications, training, ongoing education. They're really well versed in what they're doing. So I have all the faith in what they do. It's a really cool science.
Yeah, and then another huge misconception, obviously, is that A lot of people think organic doesn't use pesticides. So yeah, if you could just kind of touch on too, like how that, obviously how they can use pesticides and how the pesticides they use are different from conventional.
Yeah, so that's another really interesting story. Speaking of apples, so organic pesticides, like maybe a fungicide, for example, used in organic and conventional are like the same thing, except they just change one inner ingredient to make it natural, and all of a sudden it's organic approved. So it's really a lot of the same thing. So organic pesticides are just naturally derived, but that doesn't mean anything in terms of toxicity or anything. But a lot of them are older, more outdated, more natural means, which some people, they like that. They like the appeal to nature fallacy. It makes them feel better. But scientifically and technically, it really doesn't make a difference. You just have to look, as a farmer, you have to look at what is the problem, what do I need to treat, and how can I go about treating that? You can use a number of different medicines, if you will, to treat that plant, but organic sometimes uses a lot more. So when I was touring apples, like I spent a lot of time in apples last year for some reason. I was in Minnesota, Michigan, Washington, touring all these big commercial apple orchards. And I would say, well, how come, you guys aren't organic? Are you organic? And if not, why? And they'd say, I don't want to go organic because I don't want to spray that much. And I'm just sitting here like mind blown when they're doing like 10 times more well, not 10 times more, but just like 10 more applications throughout the year, because organic is natural, and so it doesn't work as well. Right. And so farmers don't want to spray, right? So when you talk to the farmers, they say, well, with organic, we've got to spray more, we've got to charge more money because there's more inputs, there's more costs, there's more certifications. Like, I don't want to, put down organic farmers that are doing it to be more profitable. But there's also a lot of people that are saying, I don't want to be organic certified because after you do it all, you're actually really maybe not that more profitable. Some people are, and it depends, I think, demographically. Here in our rural region of Iowa, I don't think people are going to like care about it as much as maybe somebody in downtown LA, So it's all different.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it's just, it's good to inform people that, they do use pesticides. However, obviously all of it is safe no matter what. Like, I mean, the levels of pesticide residues on both organic and conventional are so incredibly low. It's like not something that anybody really needs to be worried about. So,
and I talked to a farmer too that she grows 5,000 acres of fresh produce in South Carolina, and she's talking about how they have like 135 employees. It's a nice big farm. And she talks about how all of her equipment is swabbed. So when those bell peppers go through, everything is swabbed. It's tested for residues right there. A lot of produce is washed on site. It's washed or chopped or processed right there on site. It's all inspected, tested, regulated. And so she's like, if her produce is tested and it's even like a fraction of a billionth of a gram over what is allowed via the EPA or FDA or whoever, USDA, whoever is monitoring it at that time, whatever they're doing, she gets fined, written up. I mean, her load will get rejected. Like, her employees are out of a job, So when you look at it from a business perspective, you're like, I'm not going to risk that. Even for us, when we have semi-loads full of corn or soybeans and we go to sell those, I mean, they get probed, they get checked for insects and moisture and all that stuff to make sure, like, this is good. We're not just selling like a bunk load of crap that's going to end up. We very, very much care. And when you compare what we're doing now compared to what it was like, 50 or 100 years ago, I mean, technology is just improving every aspect of our lives, whether that's food or our smartphones or anything. I mean, it's just, we're just constantly evolving as a society, food no exception.
Yeah. I think that's one misconception too, is that, a lot of people think, farming isn't really ever, getting more sustainable, like there's so many things that farmers are doing all the time to make things more sustainable. And one thing I did want to ask you is I hear so much about like regenerative agriculture now, and I don't know, like I can never really get like a definition for it, or like when somebody describes it to me, I'm like, well, yeah, conventional farmers already do that. Like, I don't know. I'm confused a lot of times. Like,
Sure.
they'll say like, oh, well, what do you think about
Yeah.
I can't say the
I
word,
would,
but
yeah, you're so right. And that's a great question. I think regenerative is a really cool movement, but you're right, because it is really hard to pinpoint what exactly that does mean. So our farm here in Northeast Iowa, it's really hilly, so we're huge into conservation. We do a lot of cover crops, no-till farming, crop rotation, really utilizing a lot of practices that would be considered regenerative. I would say that we are a regenerative farm. We've earned awards for Farmers of the Year for soil and water conservation. There's a lot of programs that we're enrolled in to be recognized and to do the right thing for the soil. So I agree with you that yes, there's a lot of benefits into being so-called regenerative. The better you take care of the soil, the better it takes care of us. But there are other parts of the country or other regions maybe that don't do that. Like maybe they're not into it as much based on their soil type, or maybe they're sometimes farmers are just set in their ways, right? Like for me, when I see tillage equipment going down and like tilling the soil, like I'm like, oh my God, stop tilling, because I see no-till as such a great thing to do for the soil. Scared to do no-till. They say, well, you know, I think I'm worried about compaction. I'm worried about this. I don't think we have the right soil type. So can you do things better? Yes. Does it take farmers time to change? Yes. It's like, well, my grandfather did this. My dad always did it this way, so I'm going to do it this way.
mm-hmm.
And it's like, yeah. But another quote that I really like is tradition is the biggest threat to agriculture, because we should always be looking to do things better. And I think generally we are, but there's definitely room for improvement too. So I do like regenerative. What I don't like about regenerative is when the organic or non-GMO crowd takes it and runs with that, because again, you're creating this us versus them divide, right? Like any farmer can do a great job regardless of label. So stop saying that just because I grow GMOs, I'm not good. Like I'm a bad farmer. Like we do great.
Yeah.
But it's frustrating because I like regenerative because I feel like it could do a really great job of merging everybody together. Because the second organic says GMOs are bad, the second I'm like, well, I guess I'm not going organic anytime soon. Screw you guys. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
By encouraging dialogue and kindness, we can learn a lot from each other, and keeping that open mind to say, well, what is my neighbor doing? And maybe I should try that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point too. I think a lot of times it's like you either have to be on board with this or, like organic or regenerative or conventional. And it's like, well, why can't we just take the best of all of those? You know what I mean? If there are some good things that organic farmers are doing, like, yeah, conventional farmers can learn from that, or vice versa. And, but yeah, I
really great research that's come out of organic farming. Like I go to these organic farm conferences, I talk to a lot of organic farmers, and I'm like, wow, that's cool. Like there's some legit science-based evidence behind organic practices.
Right.
But the second they say, if you're not organic, you're poisoning everything, is the second where I'm like, all right, we're done here. Like I don't want to be put down. Do you want me to be organic? Then be nice to me.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that might come from, a lot of the companies that, you see the commercials, and so for just one example, Organic Valley, like
they're the worst.
I had written an article because I went on their website once and I was just like, oh my gosh, all these claims they're making. So I kind of dug into it and I wrote an article about it. And it was super interesting because a lot of farmers that farm for them are like, they're really annoyed with their marketing. They're like, and I was surprised. I was expecting them to sort of get mad at me for picking it apart, but they were like, we're annoyed with this marketing. Like we don't agree with it. We don't agree with what they're saying. Like, so I thought that was super interesting.
Yeah, I've had the exact same experience. I went to the Moses conference, which is like one of the nation's largest organic farming conferences. And I sat in a presentation led by Organic Valley, and they talked about all the labels. And during the Q&A and the comments, a lot of organic farmers were not pleased. They were like, people don't even believe us anymore. They don't trust us. Like, I don't know why I'm paying to becoming certified organic anymore, because people don't trust it. And like, you kind of shouldn't trust it.
Right.
that organic doesn't use pesticides and they do, like, you just screwed it up. Like,
Yeah.
you just destroyed public trust.
Right.
And so you have this public trust of organic, non-GMO, gluten-free, antibiotic-free, hormone-free, and people realize free range is BS, like cage-free is BS. Like, all these labels are just slapped on there, and it's just turning into this big puddle of I don't know what to believe anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so true. It's like, I keep saying, like, we need some humor in advertising, like a different approach, like look at something like what a Geico does, or like, you know, what celebrities do with humor. Like,
Yeah.
there's so many different ways you can sell a product, and it
Yeah.
doesn't have to lie or mislead.
Right.
And yeah, it drives me bonkers, girl.
Yeah. Oh, I know. It drives me nuts too. Yeah, I mean, just because, you know, they're not, they're not just saying what's good about their product, you know, they're going beyond that and scaring consumers about perfectly safe foods. I mean, it would just be one thing if they were just being honest and like, this is why we think our product, you know, is better, or this is why we think whatever is better. But they're not just doing that. They're scaring consumers, you know, about foods that are perfectly safe to be eating. So yeah. So back to one of the questions that I did want to ask. So you kind of mentioned like cage free. I know people ask me about eggs all the time. Like, what do all the labels mean? Should I be buying, you know, cage free? Pasture raised, I think, is one of them. What do all those labels mean?
Yeah, so, you know, there's actually really not that much difference when you're buying, like, I would say, a grocery store commercial type of egg. Cages were put in place for a reason, because chickens do kind of tend to peck on each other. They have that pecking order. And so the cages were there to keep the eggs cleaner. You know, when the egg is laid, it rolls down onto a conveyor. It never touches dirt or dust or anything. It's very clean, and it goes on. And so it was created to create a more clean environment and to protect the chickens and their health. And so a lot of people think, oh, well, they're in these tiny little cages and they can't move, you know. Well, again, you have to look at the evolution. So back in the day, I think it used to be not nearly as good as it is now, but the newer cages are what they call enriched cages. So like nowadays, the cage system for egg layers, they're a little bit bigger. They have more room to run and stretch their legs. Well, not run necessarily, but like room to move around, stretch their wings. They've got perches. They've got nesting boxes to lay their eggs. So they're bigger. They've got a little bit more room, and there's more areas for them to exercise natural behaviors. So when you go into something like cage-free, free range, organic, all these things, a lot of it's kind of just the same, except there might not technically be a cage, but there's still a lot of chickens in a house, and there's your food safety is not going to be quite as good, because when you have these systems, the chickens can kind of just go and lay an egg wherever they want, and then the conditions aren't as good for the workers. The birds are more susceptible to injury and pecking order and stuff. So it's not actually in the best interest for animal welfare to go cage free. A lot of companies have done it because they've kind of had like activist pressure or consumer pressure because it sounds good, but it's actually not better for the birds. So when it comes personally, I mean, this is just my personal decision. When I buy eggs at the grocery store, I usually buy the cheapest. But if you do want to make a difference and you do want to know that your chickens are raised in a happy, beautiful, healthy pasture, whatever, your best bet is to buy local. Raising your own backyard chickens can be not that hard to do, and eggs are pretty easy to come by at your local farmer's market. So when you get it from a farmer's market, you're most likely getting that egg from like backyard hens. But remember, backyard hens are susceptible to predators, to disease, to all these things. So that's why they were all moved indoors to begin with. Mm-hmm. So we have to remember that every system is there for a reason. Like, I don't think any farmer wants to spend millions of dollars on infrastructure unless it's going to have that return on investment. So like here in Iowa, I mean, it gets pretty dang cold. You're in Minnesota, right? Mm-hmm. So I made this meme once that was pretty popular. It was a picture of a chicken in a snowbank where he was in snow up to his beak, and it said, "Be free range," they said. It would be fun. It's like people think of like, oh, free range, pasture range. It's beautiful. It's backyard. It's green and sunny days and wonderful. But it's like, not so much.
Yeah, yeah.
So I do have a lot of respect, and I do want to support, the small farmers market type family farm egg. But I think there's nothing wrong with the way it's done in the larger scale egg production as well. There's a lot of really incredible science and research that has gone into making sure that these chickens are the happiest and healthiest they can be. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that kind of ties into when you were talking about like chickens, them being outside, a lot of people, maybe they're in California and they don't realize, oh, there's these places that get really cold and they might not want to be outside. But
Yeah.
I hear that a lot too when it comes to, meat and organic versus conventional, because I know there are regulations around, just like for beef, for example, the cows have to be on pasture for a certain amount of time. And a lot of people are like, well, I want to support that because, like, shouldn't they be outside? But like, I guess my question is like, that doesn't mean that if it's not organic, they're not getting access to the outdoors. So I guess what is the difference between, like, should we be paying more? Is it better for the animals? The organic regulations, do those translate into better conditions for the animals?
Sure. Well, it's really hard to say really with that because, if you're not organic, you could still be raising awesome animals on pasture and all that good stuff. But again, it goes back to these conditions. When we think about pasture raised, yeah, that sounds wonderful when the weather's perfect, but they don't think about snow and ice and all these crazy conditions and diseases that they're more susceptible. Actually, we just turned our sheep out to pasture yesterday. And, when you turn them out to pasture, there's a lot of things you have to do with worming and vaccinating in different parts of the country. They have to worry about lice and disease and all these different, ticks or whatever is going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not that simple. And all respect in the world for any farmer that chooses to do either route. If you want to be pasture raised, there's a way you can do that very successfully and probably charge a premium for your product, and that's great and that's fine. But I do think it can be better, but it really kind of can't. It all just kind of depends on the system and the different variables, because if you're not organic, you could still be doing a great thing. Organic chickens, to be considered organic, they have to have access to the outdoors. But most of the time, that's just like a little hole in the side of the building, or like a little, like, they basically have to have access, which could be like, the size of this placemat. Mm-hmm. So, is that access to the outdoors? Like, really, technically, it's organic.
Right.
But when you're looking at like the big food companies compared to like your smaller organic pasture raised producer, there's a difference between that versus mass scale,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Not economies of scale, but when you're treating livestock, like for me as a non-organic producer, I want to have access to proper veterinary care and proper medicine. I want to have access to those tools to take the best possible care of my animals.
Mm-hmm.
So think about organic. If one of their animals gets sick, what do? They've got to turn to more natural means, or maybe just cull that animal. And so for me, I just feel like I wouldn't want to do that personally because I'd want to use all the medicine. But can it be done successfully? Sure. Can you use different, or oregano oil is a great example. There is scientific evidence to prove that it benefits the digestive tract of a chicken. So, you've got these programs in place that can work, but I don't always necessarily feel personally that it's as great as the food companies make it sound.
Yeah. Yeah.
I see mud. I see a lot of mud out the window today. I see a lot of rain and mud. I see dirty animals on pasture where they're like, because it's just not a sunny day. Like, it's
right.
like a really gloomy, rainy day. So I don't know if I'd want to see that much pasture raised on a day like today.
Right.
75 and sunny with daisies, sure. But like, come on.
Yeah. Yeah, so the whole antibiotic thing, that's sort of why, it seems like those regulations not allowing for antibiotics. I mean, it's like, what human hasn't needed antibiotics at some point in their life? Like, imagine if we were just like, oh, sorry, you can't do that because you need to you need to stay as natural as you can or something weird. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's just ridiculous. It's like if your child gets sick and they need antibiotics, like you give them antibiotics. And I think another misconception is that if a lot of people think there's antibiotics in the meat or in the milk, or even the whole hormone thing too. So if you could just kind of I know I got some questions about that when I posted this in my story, but people were wondering about, does meat contain antibiotics if it's given to the animals? And are animals given hormones? And does that affect the products that we're eating and our hormones?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I want to say thank you to everybody that's paying attention and leaving these great comments in here. Thank you guys so much we're getting a lot of really great feedback of people learning a lot. So thank you guys, and thank you for tuning in. Yeah, there's so many regulations around antibiotics in a good way. A lot of us have probably heard, that antibiotics were pretty commonplace. That used to be the case. But nowadays, as of 2017, the FDA has actually outlawed a vast majority of antibiotics. So you really can't use them anymore, a vast majority of them, unless you have a prescription from your vet. So if you talk to any large scale farm, like I've been to some of the nation's largest cattle feedlots, hundreds of thousands of head of cattle, and they're not using any antibiotics. This can be said for poultry, for anything. A lot of livestock are no antibiotics ever. But that being said, they do still play an important role. If you have to use an antibiotic, there is a label on there that explains what you have to do, and there's a withdrawal period before that can legally go to market. So even yesterday, when we were trimming our sheep hooves and vaccinating and worming before we turn them out to pasture. And every so often you trim a sheep hoof and you notice, oh, this one's got a little foot rot or a little, something going on in the foot, and so be treated. But it says right on that bottle, 28-day withdrawal period. So if we were going to sell that animal, we'd have to wait 28 days before we could sell that. And so when livestock go to market, they are tested and they are checked, and every single animal is inspected before it can legally go into our public food supply. So it's very safe. It's very well regulated, and farmers are trained and understand what they need to do. Now, some antibiotics are still over the counter, like the ones we used yesterday, but then most of them have to have a vet prescription. So I had a lamb last year, for example, that wasn't feeling well, and I knew what I needed to get, and I called the vet and they wouldn't give it to me. And they said, well, we haven't been on your farm. The vet has to be on your farm within the past 6 months in our area. So he said, well, the vet hasn't been on your farm in 6 months. We cannot prescribe it unless he comes out there and takes a look and sees what's going on. So I said, oh, come on, this lamb's really sick. So I'm like, I really need him to come out here now. Like, I'm scared I'm going to lose this lamb. And they said, well, sorry, the vet said, I'm not going to lose my license because I prescribed something. And so it's very strict, right? A vet can lose his license if he prescribes something outside of what's called the VFD, the Veterinary Feed Directive by the FDA. They can get in a lot of trouble. And us as farmers can be blacklisted from selling our meat if something tests positive. So it's pretty legit.
Right.
So all your meat and dairy products are antibiotic free. And there's a lot of regulations to make sure it's that way.
Right.
And with hormones too, we do use growth hormones on some of our cattle sometimes. It's just a pellet that goes under the ear. And there's only a fraction of a billionth of a gram difference between steak that's been treated versus one that has not. So beef is still good for you, regardless of whether it's been implanted or not. Mm-hmm. Growth hormones are not permitted in poultry or pork.
Right.
So,
yeah, I've had a lot of people ask me questions about, like, why are chickens so much bigger nowadays? And it has to be because of, steroids and hormones, and it's just how they were bred, right? I mean, it's not, yeah.
It's selective breeding. It's just
right.
Selective breeding over time, breeding for those dominant traits. Like,
yeah.
If your dad is 6'5" and your mom is 6'2", there's a really good chance you're going to be tall.
Right.
Yeah. So they do the same thing with genetics and livestock and selecting for ones that just grow big.
Yeah.
Grow quick. No hormones needed.
Yep. Another thing that people ask me a lot about are grass-fed cattle versus grain-fed cattle. So, if you could just kind of explain that. I know you've written some articles about it. I mean, I think people think that, you know, I mean, it's grain finished, grass finished, so it's not, they're not just eating corn the whole time. So if you can just kind of
Right.
explain that and what the differences are.
Yeah, I'm actually going to be writing about that for my column. It's we mentioned you and I are both writers for
Yeah,
agdaily.com.
yeah.
Writers. I'm going to be coming up with an article on that coming out here in the next couple of weeks. So Texas A&M has some really great research on there that talks about how really there's no significant nutritional difference between grass-fed or grain-fed. And again, yes, grass finished versus grain finished, because technically all cattle are grass-fed. They're raised on grass, and then depending upon what happens towards the end, towards the finishing stage, they might get fed corn or other types of feed stuff to increase that rate of gain. So ours are corn finished, grain finished, but they're also considered grass fed, right? Because they have unlimited access to grassy hay, forages type stuff like hay. And so, yeah, there's a lot of misnomers about that too. Grass fed actually isn't really well regulated. So even though our cattle are grain finished in a feedlot, they could technically still be labeled grass fed because they are fed grasses, technically. So again, there's another label that's really not that truthful. So again, unless you're buying direct from your local farmer, or there are some third-party certifications that have a little more legitimacy to them. You know, if you want to get more of like a certified grass-fed, grass-finished, there are some organizations that do that. But generally speaking, when you see like a grass-fed on a label, it doesn't always mean what we think it means. And again, that boils down to conditions. Like, I have been to Australia where I've toured some of these stations, they call them ranches, you know, where they have like tens of thousands of acres, and they've really got it down to a science. Australia is, the population's much, how do I word this? Basically, they have the land to do it, right? So like here in the States, like what we have, we don't have the land to raise livestock. There they do. And they have a different climate. And so they take the livestock and they run them on these thousands of acres. They know exactly how many head eat how much grasses per day for how long. So it's all down to a very specific formula. We don't really have that luxury, especially here in the Midwest when it's cold. So can you do like 100% grass fed and grass finished? Sure, but that grass finished in January isn't exactly a snowbank. So those hay bales or whatever the case may be, whatever types of forages they're eating, maybe in Southern California, something like that, they'd have access to grass year round because it's a more mild, non-snowy climate. So it all varies.
Yeah. And I think people too think that it's bad for them sometimes. Like, I don't know, I hear that a lot, like, you know, it's not good for them to be eating corn. Can you kind of clear up that myth too?
Yeah, that's another myth. There is some truth to grain finishing, meaning like you have to introduce it, right? Like you can't just go from a calf on a cow eating hay and milk and all of a sudden overnight just getting them on full corn, right? Like you have to work them up to it. So there's kind of like different stages or different levels of like a buffer feeding type of thing. So for sheep, we call it creep feed. Like when we take our lambs and we're kind of starting to work them up to full feed, full corn. So the only way that it would really be bad for animals is if you fed them too much too fast. You think about raising a human baby too. Like you don't take your baby from breast to pizza. Be awesome. But to go from like, you have to introduce them. You've got baby food. You've got to work them up to full feed. And so it's just like that with livestock. But, you know, they can also overeat on types of forages and grasses too, you know, so there's diet is, again, very scientifically well regulated. There are livestock nutritionists that farmers work with, and there are the feed mills that have professionals that are trained in this, that know exactly. Dairy science is incredible. Like the TMR, they call it, total mixed rations of like over 30 different vitamins, minerals, nutrients. They know exactly how much protein, fiber. coronavirus is a great example now, right? Like we've got to slow down our production because we're bottlenecked in the system. So it's, in my opinion, the industry's done a pretty good job reacting. At first it was like panic mode, but I think the industry did a pretty good job of like fixing the situation and acting quickly to say, okay, let's change their feed. Let's let them slow down, like slow down that rate of growth, slow down the hatcheries, like do all these different things and protocols so that we're slowing down the rate of gain, so that we're slowing down when they can go to market, so that we're not bombarding and bottlenecking the system. So a lot of things can be done to know exactly that research of here's how many pounds of feed per day it takes to have this rate of gain, to have this level of profitability. It's, the science is really cool.
Yeah.
Really.
And I think people don't understand like how much science goes into that. I mean, it's literally people's jobs to understand the nutrition and understand, what they need to be fed and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it's really interesting. And I don't think a lot of people kind of understand all the science that really goes into that. So
it's so fascinating. Like, I want to take everybody to all these farms.
I know.
Like, I have to show you how cool our food supply is.
Yeah, I know. It is really cool when you start learning about it, and it's so much different from what you hear, sort of activists or people that really don't know what they're talking about. And it's like, that's not what it's like at all.
Yeah. What are your thoughts? I had a couple questions too from people, more so for you, more so on the side of like, I don't know much about nutrition, right? Like I can talk farming all day, but when it comes down to like your specialty is more so kind of like these different additives and colors and maybe nutrition and all these types of things.
Yeah.
What can you say to people that are wondering, why do I thrive on a meat heavy diet? Why does somebody thrive on a vegetarian diet? Some people treat their dieting is almost like a religion, right? Like some people are like keto, like super hardcore keto, and then you have, I don't even want to say the V word, right? Because vegans are just like a whole other level of like really mean to us for promoting any type of meat or dairy, but and that really doesn't do much for their cause. Like again, just be like, just do you, but like don't be a jerk to other people. But what do you say to people that say, why do I do so well on this type of diet?
I mean, it's so crazy to me that like you have two ends of the spectrum, and the people, on one end think that that is the solution to like everything. And then the people on the other end, it's the complete opposite diet. And they think that is the solution. And it's just crazy to me that they're like just the complete opposite diets. But I mean, again, it comes back to kind of what we were talking about at the beginning. Like if you choose to eat that way and it works well for you, like great. But but then when you get into making claims, that aren't backed by the evidence, like that's where the issues come in. It's like, again, I would never tell somebody you shouldn't eat that way or you should eat this way. And, I'm not a dietitian either. So obviously that's not what I do, but yeah. And it's like, if that way of eating, like works for you, great. But I think it's just when we post something that's evidence-based and then they almost take it personally because it sort of goes maybe against how they eat, and that way of eating, does make them feel good, which is fine. Like we're not discounting that you can eat that way. Like that's great. But I think the problems, the issues come in when people make, claims based off of that. And like, that's not what the evidence is showing. You can eat however you want. I'm not telling people how to eat. So you're poking
the bear of confirmation bias.
Oh yeah. I mean, and it happens all the time, even just with organic, like you share evidence. It's just crazy to me because it's like, hey, everybody save money. Like you don't need to pay more for this. And like, they get mad at you and it's like, wait a second. Like I'm telling you, you don't need to buy it.
Food is like a religion to it.
Yeah. And like, I definitely get it too. I mean, when I thought that organic was healthier and I didn't I wasn't like super like, oh, I'm not going to buy anything GMO, but like I definitely believed in that marketing for a while. And
Yeah.
I remember when I worked at that large conventional ingredient company and I went to, I was at some convention and I went to a speaker that was talking about GMOs and he was talking about them like positively, like, you know, all the benefits to them and everything. And at the time I was just like, why is he saying these? Like I was sort of mad about it because I like it didn't agree with what I believed at the time. And so I understand like where, because it becomes a part of your belief system. And so like I get it. But at the same time, you know, if the evidence doesn't back it, especially when it's something, you know, you can be saving money on and like not going to the store and being afraid of your food, like why not? If that's what, you know, if the evidence is backing that, then it's kind of funny to me that people get so angry about it. And it's like, I'm telling you, you can save money. Like,
And I think sometimes too, it takes people a while to come around, you
yeah.
know, like I have friends like that where like at first they're kind of like, wait, what? No
Yeah.
way. And then like over time, you kind of, you know, you kind of like wear off on them or whatnot.
Right.
I
Because it
just
is
want
like,
people to
it's
be
so much,
smart.
it's like the opposite. Like some of this stuff is so opposite of like what the marketing tells us and
Oh, I know.
what we think. And it's like, so you're saying these things that are like the direct opposite of that. And people just are like, you're lying. Like this can't be true. So
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
it's hard for people to kind of, I don't know, like understand. And then, I mean, you also have the barrier of people not really understanding how to evaluate studies and things like that. So it's just tough
Mhm.
because you can't expect everybody to understand that. And so when you're trying to tell people like this is what the evidence shows, but the studies are kind of hard to evaluate and things like that. So
Yeah. Do you ever wonder if maybe it's like a generational thing too? Like, so what I've always thought, so like I look at somebody like some people I know that like are in high school, right? And they're like, oh yeah, like these are the websites you avoid and these are the websites you go to know what's credible. And they talk about .edu, like looking for like university research extension, stuff like that. And like, but I look at some of the older generation, like I think about maybe I forget how old you are.
I'm 35.
Okay, I'm
Yep.
37. So we're right about the same
Yep.
age. So think about what it was like when we were kids and our only access to information was like the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Right.
And like the library, like the Dewey Decimal System and
Yeah.
like the library and our school encyclopedias. So I almost feel like with an older generation, you almost have to retrain your brains because the way that we grew up was like, oh, we only have access to credible information. Like encyclopedias are pretty legit.
Right.
And then as you grow up, you're like, you have to train your mind to say, okay, it's not encyclopedias anymore.
Yeah, yeah, that is actually a really good point.
Over, y'all. Like,
Yeah, yeah, it's a good point. And
what is this?
I think a lot of times too, like, I mean, my dad, for example, like he, you know, he'll send me like a YouTube video of, you know, a doctor and I'll be like, Dad, this is a chiropractor. Like he's not, and I'm just like, what, come on. Like,
Yeah.
so but I feel like, I don't know if it is a general, because I feel like even younger people sometimes believe that kind of stuff too. I don't know, like,
the thought I had, because it's like, you know, just kind of having to retrain your brain to say, okay, you can't just like read something on the internet anymore and take it as face value. And somebody left a comment here and then she said, is it a political agenda thing, you know? And a political agenda. And absolutely, there's a lot of that going on too. You know, if you read a study and then you're like, oh, it's a study. Oh, well, who funded it? You know, who funds the anti-GMO movement? I mean, it's like $3 billion a year coming from Organic Valley, Whole Foods, Nature's Path, Stonyfield Organic. Like they are the ones that are driving and driving a lot of the media to say, you know, the anti-GMO movement. You know what I mean? So, yeah, there's a lot of money to be made off of it. And there's, if you watch the movie Food Evolution movie, you know, you see Benbrook at Washington State or whatnot, who was paid $100,000 to say, "Oh, like you just gotta do this for us," and say,
and like so many of those pretty much all of the documentaries except for Food Evolution, like, yeah, I mean they're not unbiased, and that, you know, they have an agenda, and I mean, Food Inc. was one of them that I watched, you know, way back in the day. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I believed everything, not everything, but I believed a lot of it. And I think people just don't take the time to, they either don't take the time or they don't know where to fact check, because there is so much misinformation out there. Like you could even go fact check and be like, oh yeah, this checks out. But if you're not looking at the right things, it's so hard to know.
I tend to take the topic and then just Google it debunked. Like, you could say like Food Inc. debunked,
right.
You know, and just I just try to look at both sides of the argument and say, okay, this group is saying this thing and this other group is saying the opposite. Who do I trust? How do I know what to believe? And then look at like the credentials of the person who wrote it. Like, are they a farmer? Are they a scientist? Actually, hey, the coronavirus is a good example of this. Recently, I listened to a podcast by Dr. Folta, Kevin Folta, and he had a scientist on, and she is, God, her name is, I'm drawing a blank on her name right now, and she's so fantastic. Why am I drawing a blank?
I think you shared it. I haven't listened to it yet, but I want to listen to it.
She's so good.
Yeah.
She is an infectious disease scientist that literally studies the coronavirus and how it works. And I was mind blown. Like, everybody needs to listen to this podcast. But why do I trust her? Because she does this for a living. Like, she has a Harvard PhD in biostatistics, and she is the one that is actually doing the research on the coronavirus. And so while you have some people saying like, oh, you don't have to wear a mask, like we're overreacting, and then you have the other side that's going like, we're all going to die tomorrow. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle.
Right.
That's when we have to go straight to the source.
Yeah.
Look up her name. It's something Dean. It's driving me crazy.
I think that's true with everything too. You know, you'll always, even when there's a scientific consensus, even on something like GMO, and then you'll get a scientist, you know, that's saying the opposite, and then somebody's like, well, this is a scientist and they're saying the opposite. But it's like, but if it's a scientific consensus, or like the majority of the scientists that are experts in that area are saying one thing, I mean, you can't just have one single person, you know, saying the opposite, and then like that's typically not going to be the truth. So I think that's sort of like with everything, just to sort of see.
It's so true, so true. Natalie Dean is her name.
Okay, I need to listen to that one. I saved it.
Her Twitter handle is Natalie X Dean, and she is fantastic. I learned so much in that 1 hour podcast.
Yeah, I need to listen to that.
And it's one of those things, it's like, well, how many infectious disease experts do you know? And it's like, nobody raised their hand.
Right.
Like, I know none. Like, I know her from Twitter.
I started following a ton of them on Twitter, so.
Yeah. And that's the other thing that's cool, right? Is like, before social media can be excellent and it can be awful at the same time, but at least it gives that opportunity to track down the experts.
Right, yeah. I think Twitter's a great place for following, you know, actual scientists and experts. You know, obviously Facebook is mostly just people sharing things they don't really know anything about. So I found Twitter to be really helpful, like following people, and, you know, they're posting stuff on there from their own experience. And it's just, it's kind of cool. Like, especially now with coronavirus, you know, I've followed so many epidemiologists and virologists, and it's really helpful. So
and a lot of people don't even know what epidemiology is, right? And so it's not part of the